Hello, welcome to this mini lecture on No Country for Old Men. I have chapters 1 through 3 here. The way the structure of this lecture, these series of little mini lectures works is that I will start with a plot for each one of the chapters, and then I will go into an analysis. So in other words, I kind of catch us up as we go into the plot elements, and then afterwards we go into the analysis. So if that helps you sort of, rewind, fast forward, skip ahead, whatever you need to do, whatever you are comfortable doing, as long as you get the information, which I think is interesting and important, but more likely it just leans on that the way I introduced it in the module itself, which is this is just a lens that I'm offering you to look through. These are essentially a consolidation of my notes, and I present them with slides. So without further ado, I'll give you what I have, and hopefully it's helpful to you. So, No Country for Old Men. This is a book by Cormac McCarthy, who has written a number of books, and most of them are fairly critically acclaimed, and they're pretty. I've taught a couple of them before. This one is probably a little bit more user-friendly than most of his other books, so for that, I don't know what you deserve. Thanks for getting through it, or I deserve thanks for offering it to you, but at least in this book, either way, you have a lot of action and sort of, plot and stuff that you can really sink your teeth into. Sometimes some of his other books tend to wander off a little bit, but we won't get to that now. We'll get to the book itself, because that's probably what you're most interested in, because that's what was assigned. Okay, so some general strategies before I get started that I wanted to remind you of. As I say in the introduction in the module itself, that some of these are just elements that maybe you could look out for. When I say in the introduction meta, and by the introduction I mean just whatever this video, the page that this video is embedded within, is that some of these elements are just things that you can look at in a meta context, meaning metacognitive or meta, however you want to define that. Essentially, just how the book itself is constructed and what the author's sort of intentions in sort of putting things together are. You don't have to spend a ton of time on that, because I do want you to enjoy it, but you will probably have to at least be aware of some of the ways that the author is constructing the book in order to sort of really get into that deeper critical analysis that I've already sort of presented to you last module with the critical analysis. Right? It really gets into the weeds sometimes. But some of the selected, meaning this isn't everything that the book does, but some of the things that you might be able to see or provide examples for, or at least just hold in the back of your mind. Point of view is pretty unique here. Not unique in the context that it's never been done before, but just in the way that it's constructed. It is very particular how the shifting point of views sort of work. And Medea Res, which is our old friend that I've mentioned a few times, which is just the action just gets started. So you may have a little bit of confusion at first, and then you go back. Again, this is mostly just stuff that you've probably already gone over, but now that I'm pretty assured that everybody's at least started the book, I can start sort of taking this apart a little bit more now that we don't have to necessarily just figure out kind of what's going on. Dialogue. Dialogue is really sharp here. I don't know, that's not a literary term, but Cormac McCarthy is really good with dialogue and sort of how, and he offers a lot of room in the novel for the dialogue to sort of work itself out. It's very naturalistic, very sparse here, probably because it's reflective of the characters themselves. But there's a lot of things that he suggests with the dialogue that he doesn't necessarily follow up with an explanation. That is obviously an authorial choice. He could just say, he said this, and then explain exactly what was going through his brain at all times, right? Doesn't always do that. He's just sort of this best back and forth dialogue, and you're sort of supposed to sort of, in some ways, build the character out of that and build some of the meaning from that. So there's a way to do that with the dialogue, and mostly it just involves sort of taking the clues and sort of offering what it suggests is going on in the person's brain, and then you kind of fill in the blanks. And sometimes it's really obvious, and other times it's a little bit more mysterious and ambiguous as to what's going on. I'm thinking specifically of and I'm going to mess up his name, I always do, Chigurh, the serial killer kind of hitman guy. He's really hard to read sometimes outside of what he actually says, because when he speaks a lot. Llewellyn is interesting in that he offers a lot of himself through the dialogue, and so you can read maybe a little bit more into it. But motivations are a little bit mysterious. Sometimes somewhere in between is probably the sheriff. But those are the three main ones that probably you're going to latch onto at first. But that's what I mean by dialogue, and obviously it matches. It connects to point of view as well. So genre, this is kind of westerny, kind of crime novel, I guess, is another way to describe it. Something to think about in that meta context. Monologue, there's a lot of internal monologues, meaning, they sort of talk to themselves a little bit, especially Llewellyn. He talks to himself a lot. But then there's also these external monologues that start the chapter, right? That the sheriff sort of establishes his point of view. He definitely puts his stamp on things. Shigurth actually does do some monologues too, and they're actually pretty revealing of sort of how he views the world. They're very philosophical. It's kind of he's a very Cormac McCarthyan character, for lack of a better term. Setting is pretty important too. This is Texas, central West Texas, somewhere around there, and so the people and the landscape. Cormac McCarthy does pause often to observe the landscape, so that's another thing that you may want to also pay attention to. Okay, so now that those general strategies are established, in the next video I'm going to get into some of the chapter 1 plot elements. There's a lot of material here, and I'm going to try and consolidate it as best I can. Move on, as you may be able to already know by some of these particular videos and some of the later some of the meetings that I've had with most of you by this point, probably. I tend to talk a lot, so I'm trying to keep it a little bit more consolidated than that. So I'm going to break this lecture series up pretty and I'll label them pretty well. So this is just sort of the introduction. This is sort of the big picture stuff before we get started. And then as we go into the next videos, there's going to be some pretty finite details that I'm going to go over. Some I'm going to spend a lot of time on, some I'm just going to sort of touch on. But in either case, I think these videos are going to be very helpful in terms of walking through if you do need that sort of extra push to find some details and make some connections, or at least or if nothing else, see kind of how my brain works as I'm reading this, because it may be helpful to you because you're going to be probably writing something at least a couple of times on this, if not just in the responses, but also in the later papers. I will probably offer an option to go over this, and then in the midterm, if I do offer it, it'll probably just be some extended response as well. So I will touch upon some of these elements again later, and even later on in this module. So I do think that it's going to be helpful for you. Okay, thanks.